Hi everyone, here's the Book Chemist once again. Today I'm reviewing In Custody by Anita Desai. You know how they say that you should never meet your heroes? I think that is absolutely true. And it's not necessarily because they'll turn out to be awful people. It's just that there's every chance that they'll turn out to be human beings. And human beings inevitably can never live up to our expectations, to the pure image we've built in our mind based on their deeds or the art they've created. This art elevates our souls to uncomparable peaks of ecstasy, and there is every chance that the person who created the art might end up looking a little bit banal and even a little bit gross. That's exactly what happens in the novel, In Custody, which is about Devon, a meek, grumpy and timid teacher at a college in a small town in India, who is given a chance to meet his hero, his literary hero in particular, and whose life is completely derailed precisely by this opportunity. It's a brilliant gem of a novel, with a very neat spiraling structure that made me think of a short story of Kafka. One of those stories where a fairly banal and simple beginning, the necessity in this case to fill up the special issue of a magazine and writing an article about a poet and interviewing the poet. This very simple premise somehow creates a noose around the protagonist that keeps getting tighter and tighter and keeps trapping it into a suffocating situation. Devon, the protagonist, is enamored with poetry. He sees it as one of his few escapes from the stifling work and family life that he leads, and he is often reciting poetry to himself as a consolation from his daily frustrations. And he is given a chance to meet Noor, the Urdu poet on whom he wrote a monograph when he was younger and who he reveres as a god of literature. However, when Devon does meet Noor, he realizes that he is an old man who is grumpy and opinionated, and not in a very interesting way either. He is overly fond of rich food and drink, and he's tangled in a family dynamic that is even more sad and fraught than Devon's own family dynamic is. In Custody is a sad, short novel where Devon's predicament, which already looks pretty desolate on page 1, somehow keeps getting grimmer and grimmer as the novel progresses and he accumulates debts and obligations and responsibilities. What saves the novel from feeling too sad and suffocatingly so is the fact that the narrative always allows us to contemplate Devon's situation through the lens of irony. We are able to appreciate the humor of Devon's conundrums and problems without looking down on him, without making fun of him, but by empathizing with him and with the difficulty of his struggles. The most obvious irony in the book, to me at least, is that for all that Noor is seen as such a master of poetry, the few snippets of his poetry that we're allowed to read in the novel actually read as fairly basic poems about the changing seasons, about nature, about birds. And Devon himself is quite surprised when at one point in the novel he discovers that Devon's favorite poets are the Romantics, Byron and Keats, and he is particularly fond of the images and the musicality of their major poems. I'm not trying to dismiss romantic poetry as simplistic or outdated. I'm a big fan of romantic poetry, especially Keats, and I'm not trying to look down on Noor's intellectual nourishment. I think revelation can come from all types of literature and all types of art, more broadly speaking, and I've learned important lessons about life both from Tolstoy and from R.L. Stein's Goosebumps books. All I'm trying to say is that it's quite fun to see how these poems that Devon has turned into a religion, one he is ready to sacrifice his life for, at the end of the day are quite simple, quite immediate poems. The second irony that I perceived in the novel is the parallel and the mirroring between Noor and Devon, the poet and the scholar, two men who are apparently very different from one another, but who are also very similar in many ways, and who are locked in this strange, inescapable relationship. The novel's title itself, In Custody, is a reflection on the notion of being the custodian of somebody's work, and a reflection on the honors but also the responsibilities that come with this role. Speaking in more concrete terms, the irony here is that Devon is deeply shocked by the distance between the image he has of Noor as a man of higher ideals and of noble spirit, and Noor as a real person, somebody who is overly fond of sensual pleasures and who can be quite grumpy and base even. But this same distance is also very much there in Devon himself. He is somebody who's truly and deeply fond of poetry, somebody who sees it as the great consolation and salvific force in his life. He should be a connoisseur of human emotions and of the human spirit. He should learn from these poems how humans feel and how humans think. And yet he is constantly petty and small-minded and, as I mentioned, grumpy. He always assumes the worst in others. He's always putting up silly fights just to quarrel with his wife. He's always ignoring his son. This element of the book spoke very closely to me, because I'm somebody who believes deeply that reading is a vital and noble pursuit, that it's the one way we have of accessing other people's thoughts and inner lives and experiencing the world through their own perspective and realizing that other people have inner lives just like our own, and that they go through problems and conundrums that are sometimes very different, sometimes very similar to our own. I think that reading nourishes us. I think that it nourishes our emotional intelligence. But at the same time, for all that I've read quite a few books in my life, my phone pinged, I feel myself falling time and again in the same pitfalls, falling back on my prejudices, acting feeling small-minded and petty, and overall failing to live up to the lessons that I'm supposed to have learned from all these books. Overall, In Custody feels very much like a novel for readers, and even more a novel for scholars, people who are familiar with the joys and with the many pains of toiling away to preserve beautiful literature, especially in a world that does not seem to consider that a valuable pursuit, a world where students and faculties and often publishers seem sometimes downright hostile to the pursuit. It's also a very beautiful reminder of a maxim of Stephen King that I think holds a lot of value. He said that life isn't a support system for art, it's the other way around. In the novel, the happiest scene here, really, is a very simple scene where Devon takes a walk around his neighborhood with his son. They take a short stroll, they go look at a few parrots flying in and out of trees, and a feather falls from one of the parrots and they laugh together. And it's a very simple type of happiness. By all means, it's just a break in the pettiness and the constant quarreling of Devon's family life. But it still feels more luminous. It still feels like this happiness has more value than the fairly self-absorbed happiness that Devon finds in the poetry he loves so much. I love literature as much as the next person, but it's sometimes important to remember that its consolation is not everything, and that the pleasures of everyday life, which do exist among all the drudgery and all the difficulties, are still worth chasing and are still worth cultivating and appreciating whenever possible. I look forward to hearing what you thought of the novel. It's another one of those books I've had on my shelf for years, and I'm really happy I finally managed to read it. I have no idea whatsoever whether it's a very famous novel, whether it was quite popular when it came out in '84, or whether these days is not as widely read. It was assigned reading for a university class, but it was removed from the syllabus at the last second, so I didn't really discuss it in college, which is when I acquired the book, and I look forward to discussing it now with you guys in the comment section. Thank you as always for watching the review, thank you to my patrons for supporting the YouTube channel, and bye everybody.